Yo, what's up everybody? It's Fright Delight. Happy Friday, and I hope y'all having a great day. To me, Friday the 13th is a lightning in a bottle franchise. It's rare to have a whole franchise spawn from copying another movie, Halloween, and not only that, be just as iconic with the killer. Now, I'm gonna let y'all know a little bit about me. Jason, he's my all-time favorite horror icon.
This guy stinks!
Yeah, I said it, and what are you gonna do about it? Not a fucking thing. Him being my favorite doesn't blind me from the fact that these are bare bones slasher movies with little to no plot. You really get into the movie to watch Jason mutilate people instead of watching the story unfold. But let's not waste any time and get straight into the rankings. Start with going through these categories. At the bottom is Kill Me Now, which to me are the films that are the worst of the franchise. Right above that is Dead in the Water, for movies that aren't the worst, but they went nowhere for me. Then right in the middle is Just Another Friday, pretty much a movie in the franchise that's the middle of the pack. It doesn't do anything besides exist as another Friday the 13th movie. Above that is More Please Voorhees, for films that are just slight of perfect for a Friday the 13th movie. And at the top of the food chain is Friday the 13th, which is a bit on the nose, but these movies are the pinnacle of the franchise in my opinion. These are the films that I would rewatch before any of the other movies on this list. Now, before I begin, I just want to say that this ranking is not the end-all be-all. This is solely my opinion for each of the movies in the franchise. And if you have something different, comment down below and where you will put these films. So without further ado, let's start the ranking off with the original Friday the 13th, made in 1980. It's about a group of camp counselors that are killed off one by the late, great Betsy Palmer, playing Ms. Voorhees, taking revenge on those who did not save her child when he was drowned. This is one of the only two films in the franchise to not feature Jason Voorhees as the killer, and honestly it makes sense. Jason drowns while camp counselors are partaking in coitus.
Coitus?
Causing Pamela to go on this wild killing spree. Now, up until the point they showed Mrs. Voorhees as the killer, the kills looked like they came with ease, but as soon as they show her on screen, she acted like she couldn't kill a fly. It wasn't her performance, because she was great, especially when she was slapping the final girl back and forth like a pimp that's owed money. What I have a problem with is when Mrs. Voorhees is shown on screen, she loses all her killer instincts. It's like she forgot what she was capable of as soon as the camera pans her way. And not to mention the reveal was lame too. She wasn't shown throughout damn near the entire film and only comes on screen to tell a backstory, stop Alice, and get beheaded. So that, coupled with the uninteresting characters and just above cheesy kills, puts it at Just Another Friday for me. Also, I think I'm the only person that likes the ending, even though it's a cop-out, because it allows Jason to come back as the killer in the following films and it makes sense within the universe. Next on the list is Friday the 13th Part 2, made in the next year, 1981. Now, this is a film that I rewatched recently. It's about Jason taking revenge on the counselors that try to camp at Crystal Lake. The movie started off on the wrong fucking foot. You start the movie off with a recap of the last movie, like we can't remember what happened. Then we cut to Alice from the last film coming back and getting, spoiler alert if you haven't seen the 40-year-old movie, she gets killed within 6 minutes after the recap ends. 6. Aside from it not making sense, I hate it when sequels kill the survivors of the previous movie to add stakes or whatever they're trying to add. Unless the ensemble cast survived the entire movie like Scream, there's no reason you should kill the final person in the opening minutes of a movie, especially if you're going to disrespect the audience by adding a 5-minute recap to it. But aside from that, Baghead Jason is a positive for me. I have no complaints for the design, and if there's any kill I'm going to talk about, it's Mark's death. It's both brutal and hilarious how he gets hit and then rolls back down the flight of stairs into a white screen. I also like how the final girl used her child psychology to trick Jason and get away. The movie ended better than some of the films on this list, but that doesn't save this movie from being next to boring because of the characters alongside the kills being average at best. With the wheelchair guy being the only gnarly death in the movie that I can remember, and bland characters that have no chemistry with one another, even the final girl wasn't memorable to me until she whipped Jason's ass with a chair and put Pamela Voorhees' sweater on. So with all that being said, it's not the worst, but to me it's Dead in the Water. Next in the franchise is Friday the 13th Part 3, which I'll say would have been a better movie if it wasn't for the constant attempts at the 3D in my opinion. Jason gets his iconic hockey mask, which is a plus, but besides the handstand guy killed, there are no other kills that really stuck with me. Even, what's her name? Debbie's death was reminiscent of the first movie with Kevin Bacon's character. This film had no characters that I genuinely liked or could gravitate to. There's way too many hallucinations that went on throughout the end of the film that honestly frustrated me more than anything, especially because one of the creepiest scenes I can remember from him, when Jason chases, what's her name? The main final girl? Jason chases the main final girl without his mask, and the look he gives is nightmare inducing. But guess what? It didn't happen. It was a hallucination. And to top it off, Pamela Voorhees comes back and does the exact same thing Jason did in the original, which added to my frustration. And come to find out, That was a hallucination too, which just made me not take this movie any type of serious. Compared to all the other Friday the 13th, this isn't one I see myself rewatching, so with all that being said, you'd have to kill me now before I rewatch this movie again. Next on down the list is Friday the 13th, The Final Chapter, which is a movie I seen in my youth, but never remember much about. Now, this is a film that I wish I would have rewatched more in my lifetime. Jason was as brutal as you want him to be while being alongside some of the more entertaining characters in the franchise. Even the red shirts have hilarious dialogue that makes me smile ear to ear.
Jesus Christmas! Holy Jesus goddamn! Holy Jesus jumping Christmas shit!
And you know I couldn't leave out Kristen Glover's dance moves. I'ma start busting down like him at my next outing. This movie also starts off in a similar way to part 2 with a recap, but is done much better as a story told around a campfire, which doesn't make it seem repetitive. There's plenty of campiness in the film that's very enjoyable, but a few things I didn't like was the fade in the white towards the end when little Tommy Jarvis was chopping Jason up, and right at the end, after him hugging the main girl, it goes to another fade to white screen. Speaking of the end, I thought it was pretty lame with how they tried to make Tommy the killer in the end too. I know they tried to expand it a bit at the end of the film, but I always thought it was weird that they went in this direction but ended up going using another person as Jason in the next movie. And then following that one, they put Jason back as the main killer and Tommy Jarvis as the hero. So my question is, what was the point? But besides the ending being weird, getting there was a hell of a ride, and I can honestly say that I would want more Please Voorhees. Now, moving on to A New Beginning, which I'm pretty sure is the black sheep of the franchise simply because Jason isn't the killer in this movie. We follow Tommy Jarvis 5 years after the events of the last film. He got transferred to this youth development center with an interesting set of people. This B-movie cheese with bad acting makes this film unintentionally funny. No disrespect to the actor, but Reggie the black kid, he acts like he used to be a slave.
Man, you are one scared cat.
His brother, played by Miguel Nunez, was a plus for me too. He got "ooh baby" stuck in my head before getting whacked. And adding to that, Tommy Jarvis being unhinged during the entire movie was entertaining, even though his ending was whack as hell. And that reminds me of what I don't like about the film, and that's there's a lot left to be desired. Coming from the final chapter with Jason's brutality, this one just felt disappointing with all the cutaway kills alongside the mediocre killer. It makes the slasher aspect kind of boring, which is the main reason I get into the movie in the first place. Another thing is, it took way too long for Tommy to get involved in the story towards the back half of the film. There's a point in time where the kills are going on and he's nowhere to be found, but he does come back and doesn't make that much of a difference when he does. All in all, this is a movie I could easily have a couple of drinks to and have a great time, but without that little boost, I'd say it's just another Friday the 13th film. Next on the list is Jason Lives, which from what I understand is a fan favorite within the community. Now you can take what I'm saying with a grain of salt because I'm just a regular dude, but in my opinion, this movie was kind of boring. None of the characters besides Tommy Jarvis was entertaining to me. Even most of the kills past Jason's first kill weren't even on par with some of the kills from the prior movie. I mean, you got Jason slamming the guy's face into a tree making a smiley face. Honestly, this is a movie too goofy for me, and that's saying a lot from a guy that enjoys B-movie cheese. For example, look at the laser on this gun. It's like they bought it from the fucking Toys R Us. Now, I can usually get down with movies like this, but only if the actors play into it and I can feel that on screen. Like I said earlier, none of the characters resonated with me besides Tommy Jarvis, and everyone outside of him felt as interesting as watching paint dry. But even with those negatives, it didn't really kill the movie for me. And do you know why? It's because of how they ended the movie. Besides maybe 3 movies, Friday the 13th has always had a problem with how they end their films, but this movie breaks the mold and does something different by ending the movie in a way that actually makes sense. They don't have Pamela Voorhees or somebody's dead father coming out of nowhere. They just let Tommy do what he set out to do and didn't abandon the idea 2 minutes before the credits roll. The movie ended in such a great way, and it started in an awesome way too with Jason's resurrection. Everything made sense within the universe, and they didn't disrespect the icon by having a dog pissed on him to be resurrected. Nightmare for it. Anyways, with all that being said, because of the mediocre second act being sandwiched in between 2 acts that make this movie a fan favorite in my opinion, I'd have to put this film in just another Friday. Next on the list is Friday the 13th, The New Blood, which admittedly I've never been that big of a fan of, which sucks because this movie had the potential to be an awesome follow-up to Jason Lives. Jason's design in this movie is the best he's looked up until this point, especially once he's unmasked. Kane Hodder plays as Jason, which in my opinion is the best actor for him, besides one other version that we'll talk about a little bit later on in this list. His performance makes this version of Jason menacing and adds a level of depth to the violence on screen, even though the kills aren't as brutal as some of his other entries. What's done to Jason in the 3rd act is more savage than any of the kills in the film. Like when Tina squeezed Jason's mask off and you see the pus coming out of his skull, then getting the nail shots to his head while being set ablaze in an amazing fire stunt. Unfortunately, those positives don't overshadow the negatives this movie has, especially that trash ass ending. I'm not gonna spoil this 40-year-old movie, but the audience didn't deserve what they gave us. If they're gonna skimp out on the kills, they might as well at least make up for it by making a coherent ending at the very least. Fuck it, you know what? I'm gonna spill the beans. Pretty much, the main girl's father has been dead for the better part of a decade, but all of a sudden, when she's about to get caught by Jason, she's able to revive her dad. And not only that, when he comes out the water to defeat him, it looks like he just went for a swim. I've never been so confused until I seen this movie as a kid. I remember watching the movie back to back in the same day because I thought I missed something. But nope, they just didn't have a way to end the movie when they have a girl with telekinetic power that could have done legit anything else to defeat Jason. But let me not get hung up on the ending because that isn't the only issue. The characters besides maybe Tina the final girl weren't all that great, and even she wasn't all that great. No disrespect to the actress. And honestly, the guy that was surviving with her, what's his name? Nick. He wasn't all that good either, in my opinion. I think Billy Gallo would have been a perfect pick for this role and probably would have bumped up this character's charisma and made me like the movie a little bit more. And that might be my nostalgia for Night of the Demons talking. Anyways, as much as I want to put this movie in the more please Voorhees category because of Jason's design, what he endures throughout the movie, in addition to that sleeping bag kill, which was pretty cool, the bland characters, one-note cinematography, and weak-ass ending, not to mention the cutaway kills, makes this movie dead in the water to me. Now on to the next, which is Jason Takes Manhattan, which this movie should have been called Jason Takes His Time because that's exactly what happens for the majority of the film. I'm not gonna waste any time and put this in the Kill Me Now category, but don't worry, I'm not gonna say that and not tell you why. First of all, let me get the only two positives I have for this movie out the way. The movie opens with shots of New York and the song Darkest Side of Night playing, which went amazing together. I swear this movie catfished the hell out of me just by the way it started. It probably happened to you guys too. I'm not sure, but I can tell you for sure it happened to me. And my second positive for this movie is one you all probably can predict, and that's the boxing kill towards the third act of the film. And I've actually never seen somebody actually try to square up with a horror icon before, unless I'm tripping. But this scene was both awesome and silly as hell, and in my opinion, this kill wasn't worth watching an entire movie for, which leads me to my negatives. The kills were as boring as you can get, and as soon as I seen Jason hit the cameraman like Negan did in season 6 of The Walking Dead, I knew this was gonna be a long ride. Also, speaking of the deaths, I gotta talk about Jason's demise. Now, I see where Freddy and Jason got that stupid ass idea where Jason turns into a kid when he's met with water. And even before that happens, Jason's hockey mask is taken off, and it looks like they threw a mask on from Spirit Halloween or something to call it a day. They could have done anything other than this, and it would have been better. And I'm not gonna lie, I think this is the worst Jason has ever looked. Not that he's supposed to be a Chad or a Stunning or something, but you get what I mean. Another thing I didn't like was this man never took Manhattan. When Jason gets there, there's no showing why people should fear him outside of the Crystal Lake crew. There's this one scene I can point to when the final two survivors are running through the subway, full of people by the way, trying to get away from Jason. He walks right by all these people, potential victims, and the most he does is knock over this woman standing in his way. Now, it might be me and my sick ass mind wanting to see Jason be as violent as possible on screen, but hear me out. I think the movie would have been worth watching if during that scene, as the two survivors are getting away from him, he starts to massacre everyone in the subway in the carnage-filled scene. But that's neither here nor there, so you have to kill me before I even watch this movie again. Alright, now moving on to probably the most controversial film on this list, Jason Goes to Hell. And to me, this movie isn't as bad as people say it is, but is it anywhere near good? First, to start off with my positives, Jason's design is awesome in this movie, and it's a shame because he's barely in the fucking thing. But in the moments he is in the movie, he was menacing and adds genuine tension when interacting with the characters. Well, that's until the third act of the film, which I'll get into when I get into my negatives. Now, another positive for me is they try something different. While it didn't work for the most part, I can appreciate when a movie does something so different instead of the same wash, rinse, repeat formula, especially when it's the 9th movie in the franchise. I'm actually a dude that liked Halloween Ends for that reason, even though it was the wrong decision to do something like that during the third movie in the trilogy. Now, my next positive for this film, which isn't really that big of a plus, is that weird bounty hunter that attempts to track Jason. I think because of the characters being so boring. So bland. It's like Steven Williams, the actor, was the only one that knew this movie wasn't good, so he played into that and did a great job, especially when compared to all the other characters that didn't do much for me. And the way he went out was honorable too, so I can respect his character a little more. When it comes down to the practical effects, it looks like they took inspiration from Hellraiser, and that's not a bad thing. It's actually a big reason this movie isn't straight garbage to me. Like when the guy got melted after Jason's worm form left his body. And another scene that comes to mind to me is the server at the diner when he goes outside to confront this dude possessed by Jason already by getting his forearm broken with ease. You know, for a movie I didn't like that much, I felt like I had a lot to say about the positives. Let's move on to the negatives, start with the elephant in the room, which is Jason not being in the movie. I didn't like the story they went with. To me, it feel like they ripped off Halloween even more than they tried to in the original. You got the Voorhees house, which never needed to be a thing. Then you have his family that's never been mentioned before in any of the other movies, all of a sudden having significance to Jason. So much so that he needs them in order to regain his original body after getting blasted by the ops, like Alex from RoboCop. I audibly groan when the second act of this movie starts and they start mentioning the Voorhees house like he's fucking Michael Myers or something. And you know what? As much as I've heard and read about Friday the 13th being an actual ripoff of Halloween, this is the movie that actually felt like they were copying that franchise. Another thing I borderline hated about this film is that when Jason is finally able to come back to his true form, he's unable to kill anybody except the bounty hunter, which is horseshit. I mean, the entire movie showed Jason, or at least the people portrayed to be playing him, to have no mercy on anybody he comes across. But as soon as he comes back to his original form, it felt like he lost all his strength. For example, I checked out of this movie during the third act as Jason is fucking going toe to toe with the main guy. He takes more than a couple of blows from Jason, and at a certain point, I was convinced that Jason was even trying to kill dude because all he does is pick him up and throw him back on the ground like a damn wrestler. Now, if any of the characters were any good, maybe I would have rooted for the main character instead of asking myself how is Jason not able to kill this dude. Which leads me to my next negative. Most, if not all, the characters outside of the bounty hunter never really caught my attention. And even the bounty hunter, I wasn't all that intrigued by. It was just that the characters around him were so boring on screen that it made him look like a gem when in reality his character wasn't all that great either. In my opinion, there's a mix of tones with the characters too, because to me it felt like half the cast was getting ready for a serious role and the other half was making it more of a campy, don't take me serious type of film, leading it to mix like oil and water, at least for me. So that was my long-winded way of saying that this movie is still stuck being dead in the water. Before you click off the video, just stay with me for a second. To me, there are two distinct sides of Friday the 13th that can make me think of the franchise in the most positive way. On one side is the serious carnage-filled tone with blood and guts spilled everywhere, met with entertaining characters. And on the other side is the campy tone with actors that know exactly the type of movie this is, committing to their roles so much that you can't help but continue to watch the horrible awesomeness you see on screen. Now, Friday the 13th has always had a B-movie feel. This movie cranks it up to a 10, actually not, an 11, and leaves no room for imagination with the deaths. I mean, you have one of the greatest kills in Jason's history within the first 30 minutes of the film. And not to mention, Jason is resurrected mostly because two teens were getting it off in another role. Now on to Jason himself, played by Kane Hodder, and once again he kills it, no pun intended. Not only is his performance great, but his upgraded look, Uber Jason, is pure awesomeness, especially with the shiny metallic look. It's both intimidating and memorable. And his look before he's upgraded is a classic Jason that I have no complaints on either. The film doesn't take itself seriously at all unless there's a kill on screen, and that works for me because like I said earlier, the Friday the 13th has always been a B-movie franchise, and a lot of the films try to take themselves too serious. And I'm a lot less forgiving when it comes to movies that don't make sense but are trying to portray themselves as being as real as possible. With this movie, it felt like the actors and even the director knew the type of movie they wanted to make and didn't hold back by trying to take itself too serious, which to me makes me a lot more forgiving, especially when the movie is as fun as it is. And for it to be about a serial killer in space, this movie wasn't supposed to be half as entertaining as they made it. Some of the negatives for me would be some of the pacing issues though. When the campy jokes stop and Jason isn't on screen, the movie does drag a bit. Another thing is the CGI, which I can't really fault this movie for because it is the early 2000s, but a negative is still a negative. And if you're a character guy like me, you might be disappointed because there's really no character development. It's more so people playing caricatures. Just one-note individuals roaming around with no real sense of direction other than to get killed. But still, to me, this movie is what I think of when I think of the campy side of Friday the 13th done damn near to perfection. Now, next is Freddy vs. Jason, which I don't think is fair to put on this list because of the presence Freddy brings to this film that none of the other films have. This isn't the perfect movie, so I'll go over a few of my negatives first. Number one is admittedly not really a negative because I don't think Ken Kersinger, I pronounced that right, did a bad job at playing Jason, but I think he was a little too slim to play a Jason role. Also, Jason's weakness was disappointing to me. When Jason turned into a kid, it reminded me of Jason Takes Manhattan when they did the same thing with sewage water. I get that they needed a weakness, but I think they would have been just fine with Freddy delving deeper into Jason's fear of seeing his mom die again, or something along the lines of a relationship between him and his mom. Another thing on my list of negatives that go hand in hand with each other is the CGI and the worm creature that possesses one of the survivors. There weren't many attempts at CGI in the film, but the times they tried were awful. The main thing I can think of is that worm that has the PlayStation 2 aesthetic, and it didn't work for me. For a movie to run with practical effects the majority of the time, having something like this was questioning to say the least. I understand that it was Freddy's way of possessing someone, but you're telling me that he couldn't have done that in any other way? It would have thrown me out the movie if it wasn't for the fact that the entire film has ridiculous things going on, like people getting hit 30 feet in one direction off of one swing. Now, onto my positives though, which is something that the other films can't provide, and that's Freddy Krueger. I think this is the best he's been since the original. He has the perfect balance of humor and intimidation that complements Jason's silence as well. This movie is only as good as his antagonist, and Robert Englund delivered. Also, his humor is unmatched in this film. The way he throws the word bitch around is hilarious.
Let me handle this, bitch. Welcome to my world, bitch. Die, little bitch.
Some of his one-liners too are memorable to me, like, "Got your nose!" Another main positive for me is that they actually deliver on the Freddy versus Jason part. The showdown was as bloody as I could imagine for it, and they went at it a couple times. Once in the dream world, where Freddy had the advantage, and another time in the real world where Jason had the advantage. And both times were satisfying. The soundtrack was great, especially the intro alongside the practical effects being as awesome as you want them to be, especially when there isn't any CGI involved. One scene that comes to mind is when Jason stabs his dude to death with his machete, then folds his mattress like a napkin. This death is my favorite in the movie, and it sets the tone for how brutal Jason will be moving forward. And one of my final positives is the ending. As you know, I think the Friday the 13th franchise as a whole has a big problem when it comes to finding a way to end their movies in a satisfying way. And something consistent in my favorites, other than the final chapter, is that they end it in a satisfying way. Now, the difference between this movie and the others is it doesn't disrespect any of the icons, and it's an ending that makes sense. Also, in my opinion, it's one of the only ways you could have ended this movie without pissing off the other side of the fan base. It kind of leaves it up in the air as to who won. The way the film subtly lets you know that Freddy lost, but only for now, is a way to end everything that doesn't ruin the movie or take you out of the experience. So I guess that was my long-winded way of saying this for sure is Friday the 13th for all the reasons I said earlier. And even with the bland acting for most of the cast, it doesn't derail the movie for me at all. And if my last couple of rankings didn't make you pull out your hair, this might be the cherry on top that makes you follow through. Last on the list is the 2009 remake, which I'll get all the suspense out the way. From what I understand, this movie gets a lot of hate that I don't understand. Now, remember how I said there's distinct sides to Friday the 13th? Well, this is the serious carnage-filled tone with an awesome Jason included. The actor, Derek Mears, killed the role, no pun intended, and made Jason even more vicious than he's ever been. I think he's the best Jason since Kane Hodder, and his screen presence adds tension that I've only felt during the final chapter, and it's probably because of his brutality. But even then, this movie is filmed in a way that makes Jason seem larger than life. Also, the intro to this film is a straight up Jason movie, condensed in 20 minutes, which caught my attention right away. Probably the best, if not my favorite intro in the series, and it's ingenious to give us what we already expect within the intro to subvert expectations. Another thing this movie did was show Jason in another light by making him more tactical in ways that make him seem like a real person instead of a supernatural being. I know he was a zombie for about half of the films, but even when he wasn't, the way he was able to move around and catch people seemed supernatural. Also, adding the underground tunnels alongside the tripwires adds a realistic tone to Jason that I haven't seen in any iteration up to this point. Baghead Jason was a nice addition too. It didn't overstay his welcome, and it felt like we got a full story aside from his zombie form, which could have been in a sequel if they would have followed through. Now, aside from Jason, the characters were on the better side of the spectrum when it comes to these films, especially the black guy and the Asian dude. Their brotherly relationship was something I didn't expect, but was happy to see that was there. The surprise death of who I thought would be the final girl had me sit up in my seat a bit. It was a nice little twist, but this film isn't perfect, leading me into some of my negatives with the film, starting with the sister of the main character, Whitney. Now, if you remember how I said the first 20 minutes of the film is probably the best intro in the franchise, well, maybe the last 5 seconds of that could have been deleted and would have made the movie a lot more cohesive in my opinion. I mean, look at this. Jason clearly brings down a machete on her just before the intro card, but the movie retcons that in the last act. Maybe the editing could have been done a little bit cleaner, then it wouldn't have been confusing, or they could have just kept the sister dead and have the main guy Clay find her severed head on top of the sweater when he enters the underground tunnels. That might be me and my fucked up mind, but that's just my 2 cents. One of the only other negatives I have for this movie is that whack ass one-liner at the end when Whitney takes out Jason with his own machete.
Say hi to mommy. In hell.
Honestly, after already being confused about how she's alive, this makes me roll my eyes even more. Like, I know there's supposed to be a one-liner at the end of damn near all these films, but whether it's the delivery of the actress or the dialogue itself, it didn't work in any way for me and could have been shaved out the movie too. So to go over everything one last time, at the bottom of the list is Kill Me Now, which is Friday the 13th Part 3, and Jason Takes Manhattan. They're the most boring movies out of the franchise, and you probably catch me watching grass grow before watching any of these movies again. Just above that is Dead in the Water, and that consists of 2 movies, Friday the 13th Part 2 and New Blood, which aren't the worst, but that's not saying much. Next up is Just Another Friday, which has the original Friday the 13th, A New Beginning, and Jason Lives. They aren't necessarily bad or my favorites, they're just middle of the road movies for what I enjoy in the Friday the 13th film. Now getting to More Please Voorhees, which only had one movie, and that's the final chapter. It was almost one of my favorites, and honestly what holds this movie back for me is the ending. And the next movie makes this film worse because they don't even follow in that direction. The brutality in some of the characters is what puts this movie at that spot for me. And last but not least, Friday the 13th, which has Jason X, Freddy vs. Jason, and the 2009 reboot. Now, these are movies in the franchise that are my favorites and I would rewatch before any of the other films on this list. I know I'm probably gonna get clowned for having Jason X at the top of the list, but fuck it. Let me know what you think about these rankings in the comments below, even if you disagree with me. And if you have any movies that you want me to rank, or franchises actually that you want me to rank, put that in the comments below too. Please like, subscribe to see more videos like this one, and I appreciate y'all coming to a Fright Delight. I'll catch y'all later. Peace.